Hello, welcome to the Creative Writing Life podcast. I'm Justin Sloan.
And I'm Paul Zeidman. Very happy to introduce our very special guest. Boy, he is a writer in so many fields. This is going to be a fascinating discussion. Welcome to the Creative Writing Life podcast, Neel Upadhye.
Hi, nice to have. Sorry.
Don't
Nice
be
to
nervous. Don't be nervous. It's okay. It's okay.
Sorry, can we take that again? I just messed that
Nope,
up.
nope. This is all live. Well, it's not live,
Yeah,
but you know what I
live.
mean. So Neel, I'm just going to go over some of your bio real quick. So you are with Azra Games, which I believe is in the Sacramento area. And before that, you worked at Electronic Arts, and you also worked for it wasn't Lucasfilm, was it LucasArts?
I actually worked with Lucasfilm while I was at EA. EA
Okay.
had the exclusive license to make Star Wars games for about 10 years. And during my time at EA, I was the creative director for marketing for all the games that EA released. And so over time, I got to do a lot of interesting work with them, which has been a pleasure.
All right, that is great stuff. So we'll get to that in a minute, but first, Justin.
Oh yeah, so we always do like, what are we listening to, reading, playing, watching, any of that kind of stuff. So just randomly, because I've been going through old sci-fi books for the fun of it, and I had read Dune back in probably 2099, somewhere in that range, and so I popped up in the audiobook for Dune, which I'd never listened to, and that has been a treat. It's multi-voice cast and all that, and sound effects here and there, and so great stuff. It's bringing me back to the old days, and I'm loving it. It's a weird one because modern writers tend to write without using omniscient view, and this one very much hops around in heads all over the place. So it's, especially when you're listening to audio, sometimes that's annoying or confusing, but because it is the multi-voice cast, less so. So I'm enjoying the hell out of it. How about you, Paul?
Very cool. I've been watching a couple of things. Well, and last week was the last week of September. So Netflix sent out their very last red envelopes, and I'm going to miss that so much. And they also said that I guess whatever they sent out, you can keep. So I decided, well, you know what? What's one that I want to keep? And so it holds a special place in my heart. So I got the 1994 flick Alec Baldwin's The Shadow, just because I'm a huge fan of the character. And the movie kind of still holds up. It's to a certain extent. I enjoyed it, but also I think I've discussed this before. Justin knows this, that I'm slowly working my way through Adventure Time on Max, and I just finished season 2. And the show is developing, and they're fleshing out the characters. And I got to say, the episode I enjoyed the absolute most recently was one where they make a movie, and it just plays on so many tropes and cliches about movie making, and it was hilarious, and I enjoyed it, and I'm looking forward to seeing what they are doing. I just started season 3, so I'm looking forward to seeing what happens with that one. Neel, what about you? What's in the reading or viewing queue?
Well, I think the last 2 shows that I just completed watching are Foundation season 2, and I had read the Isaac Asimov books decades ago at this point, and it's been fascinating to see how they adapted it, because it's such a challenge to bring a story like that to the screen, because every few chapters the story jumps forward, sometimes 100, sometimes 400 years, and so everyone you really love or care about is gone. And to do that and not do it as a pure anthology show, I think, is a real challenge, and it's very interesting to see how the filmmakers tackled that one and what they added to it. I think adaptation is an art in and of itself, and it's really fun to dissect that one. I'm enjoying it. And I also just caught up on Andor, and I have to say, I think it's probably my favorite Star Wars anything. It's so tonally consistent. It's character first. I never realized I needed more Mon Mothma in my life, and I think it's just head and shoulders above anything else in the franchise that we've seen in a long time. And so that was just a delight.
Yeah, I enjoyed that a lot as well. It's so weird to watch a Star Wars program and not have to worry about too many Jedis or lightsabers, because they're pretty much non-existent in that one. And I think that was honestly part of the appeal, because it was much more about the characters rather than lasers and spaceships.
Yeah, I mean, they took the second lead from a spin-off movie and made it an entire show, and didn't include the slapstick sidekick robot. And so the executional risk, I'm sure, felt pretty high going into it. And I think Tony Gilroy and everyone just knocked it out of the park. So
I agree totally. Okay, so Neil, tell us a little bit about yourself. I mean, we've talked to so many writers on the show before. So were you the kind of kid who, like, you've been a writer ever since you can remember, or is it kind of like you were never really keen on writing, but then you decided, hey, I'm going to try this. Hey, I'm actually pretty good at it. I think I can make a living at this. What is your story?
that's a great question. I've always been a storyteller, and I don't think I ever really considered writing as a profession. And as I was going through, grade school and getting into high school, I was that theater kid. I was always a performer. I was in all the musicals, and I would create board games for school projects, anything that was a way of telling a story. And it was really in high school, after several years of thinking I wanted to be a game designer primarily, that I watched The Lord of the Rings, the Peter Jackson trilogy, and those extended editions, came with 9 hours of making of each, and those really became my first film school. And I delved into those and realized, like, wow, the lives of the people making these movies is even more fantastic than this fantasy world they're portraying. I want to do this. And that's where my heart really got set on being a director. And of course, if you want to direct, you have to create your own opportunities. And so writing was just a natural byproduct of that, as was producing and a whole other host of things. And so I've been on that train ever since.
So, okay, so were you when you decided, like, I want to be a director, I want to make stuff, did you start making just, short films with your friends, or just kind of like, hey, I'm going to make a 5-minute short, and that kind of expanded and expanded, and then, you just kept making longer and longer projects?
Yep, exactly. I just grabbed, camcorders at the time and started making movies with my friends in high school, and got together enough of a portfolio that I was able to get into USC. And USC at the time had an interesting policy. They would not accept any films you've made as a part of your submission. They wanted to even the playing field, because access to equipment of any kind was not that readily available, right? Now we can shoot everything on our phones, but at the time there could be quite a disparity between people who had access to the equipment to shoot and edit versus didn't. And so they were really just looking for passion and storytelling, prowess, and and just some grit to do it. And so they only accepted writing submissions. And so I wrote basically prose, as like a small short story. Wasn't formatted as a screenplay or anything. And that, along with everything else they require, got me into film school. And so I went down into USC and the production major there, and ended up staying in the LA area for about 18 years.
Wow. Okay, so you went to school for production, but how did that relate to, I guess, doing more writing and more, I guess, directing and filmmaking for you? Was that part of your curriculum, but did you also start doing stuff like on your own outside of school?
That's right. Production at USC is just simply to say the making of films, versus critical studies, which is the study of film. So as a production major, you're not studying to be a producer, you're learning all of the arts, and then eventually you might specialize. And so, yes, we did all those things. I was in a very, very lucky cohort at USC. I graduated in 2008, and I was among the last people that shot on film.
Hmm.
And so I had my junior thesis project, if you will, that they call 310, that we shot on 16 millimeter. And then we shot our 480, which is our senior thesis film, on digital, on the very first digital cameras that were the precursors to the Red when that took off. And so it was an amazing time to be able to touch the roots of this medium and really understand the the basic premises of putting a story on screen, in that very tactile medium where there is no undo button,
Right.
and you need the patience to develop the image, and that creates real discipline. And I'm so glad I got to have that experience. And because when you're in a class format, there's all these restrictions around what you can and cannot do. I always had a love-hate relationship with USC as a result. I was always producing content on the side and always had stories to tell. And that carried forward into my career past SC.
Okay, so this is where it gets really interesting for me. Is okay, so you went to school for production in film. Now, how did you make that transition from working in film production to writing and developing for games? And I'm going to let Justin take over after this because games are really his forte.
Awesome. Well, as I was leaving USC in 2008, I had two job offers in front of me. One was in a post-production facility. It was a union job. I would have been dubbing tapes in the back for years until, I got enough hours to put my hands on an Avid. And the other job offer I had was in the video game industry. It was to be an assistant editor cutting marketing podcasts for Electronic Arts on the Command and Conquer franchise. And so I decided to go that route because I felt like this job is going to let me start cutting right away, and I'm going to get better at my craft every single day. And a few years in, I thought I'd made a huge mistake because all my friends who went for that assistant union job or were getting coffee for, Seth MacFarlane were now assistant writers in the writer's room on Family Guy. And I was like, oh, what have I done? I went into this other weird medium. I should have just dubbed tapes and gotten coffee. But of course, over the next decade, video games just became increasingly an immersive medium, merged with film, all started to compete for the same entertainment dollar and the same, attention and eyeballs. And so just doubling down in this other medium that I've really come to love with interactive storytelling just kind of ended up being my path. Now, I never stopped making movies, and I was lucky to have folks even within just like EA corporate that were very supportive of that. And so along the way, I was able to sell a podcast that became an animated pilot at Disney. I bootstrapped and kickstarted a feature film that I directed that's on Amazon Prime called Dating Daisy. And along the way, just continued to move my video game career forward, eventually becoming a creative director on the marketing side for Star Wars. And then in my last 3 years that I was at EA, I spent 14 years there. There was a moment where the head of content sat me down. You could tell I was ready for something new. And he asked me, like, what would you be excited to take on? What do you think we should be doing as a company that we're not doing? And I said to him, I don't think we're doing enough storytelling in our marketing. Trailers are great for informing. Trailers are great for creating hype, but they're not great for creating connection because you fall in love with what you spend time with, and runtime matters. And as game developers, we're obsessed with metrics like DAU, daily average users, and we care about how much time somebody spends over a life cycle of a game. How many days in a row do they log in? Because we know that if we can increase that number, they're more likely to have an investment in the story, in the game, and are more likely to come back or buy the sequel, etc. And so what if we could do that? What if we could increase people's time that they spend with our brand, even when they don't have a controller in their hand? And so that's what I wanted to go and solve. And they said, that sounds great. There's no budget. Go figure it out. And so that started a year of me flying around various EA studios and making a pitch for doing short form, long form storytelling, essentially doing shorts instead of trailers, and making marketing an extension of the storytelling that happens in the games themselves. This led to a lot of opportunities that we can talk about, and eventually also got me into just writing content for the games themselves. And that was an amazing education. I had some really amazing partners who let me play with their toys and get messy and make mistakes and learn. And then all of that eventually led me to deciding to be a developer full time and get out of the marketing side of things and take all those learnings with me. And I went and joined Azure Games when it was a startup as employee number 16 last year.
Awesome. So what would you describe as your actual like day-to-day there now? Like, is it in any way resembling what you thought you might do when you went to film school? Or what has it become in this like kind of mutated version of everything led to this moment?
It very much is still relevant to the things that I picked up in film school. So one of the things that's great about a startup is that you can wear a lot of hats. And even within my time at EA, I think most of the jobs I had there, I made up. I just saw an opportunity, I'd make a pitch and then put some kind of title and responsibilities together. And I just had, different advocates over time that let that happen. And so I was always kind of an intrapreneur, if you will, leading little experimental, bizarre things within an existing company. And so then to bring that here, it's the same thing. I'm trying to carve out a set of responsibilities that align with my particular skills so that we as a team can drive forward the results we want. And we do that with everyone here. And so my responsibilities right now on the team are to be that front-facing producer that can align the team around the common goal and help us drive those outcomes. But I'm also a de facto narrative director here as well, working with the creative director, the head of design, to make sure that we are able to tell a cohesive and immersive story, stringing through all of the features in the game in a way that aligns with the goal of our design patterns and the experience that we want the players to have. I'm doing a lot of writing as well at the moment, and we're a small team, and so everyone's wearing a lot of hats, and these are just some of the hats that I've picked up here, and they continue to change, and that's just one of the fun things about being at a startup.
And has that game, has a Project Legends, has that released yet?
No, Project Legends is the code name for our first game, which is a dark fantasy action RPG that we're developing for mobile and PC. And it's still a little ways off. We're in pre-production right now, but it's incredibly exciting times. I have to say, RPGs is my jam. That's what I play. Single player, story-driven games. And to do that and build our own dark fantasy world is, man, I can't think of anything better than that.
Yeah, it looks amazing. All the concept art and whatnot on there look great. So hopefully the final product will too, I'm sure. Is it still blockchain Web3 or have you moved away from that?
Yeah,
some companies do.
Yeah, we consider ourselves to be well, from the beginning, we always knew that the game had to be fun and the gameplay had to be first. And so we considered ourselves to be kind of like Web3 sensitive to see if the opportunities are there, but never in a way that was going to take the forefront of our planning. And so we'll see what happens with it. But at the current time, there's nothing in the game that is on the blockchain, and there's no part of the core loop of the game that engages with crypto or tokens in that way.
Okay. Will there be, maybe this is too much that you can't say, and if so, just hold up a hand. Are there tokens at all in the game, even if they're not core to the actual gameplay? Is there some kind of token aspect or anything like
No,
that?
we haven't done any type of token drop or anything of the kind. No plans in the immediate future to do that. Last year we basically released one mint of NFTs that was just a free gift to the community, almost like just an early founders pass, as a club to bring early adopters in. That is it's got its loyalty perks, but those are not characters that are in the game or assets that are in the game, or anything of that nature. And so truly our team has always been focused on gameplay first, fun first. And so if you look at what would you expect from a AAA game that is a hero collector, single player, dark fantasy, action RPG from the same team, over 40% of this team is the team that created Star Wars Galaxy of Heroes. That's the type of experience that we're creating, but it goes so well beyond the ambitions of that game. It's pretty phenomenal.
Yeah. So I went to GamesBeat in LA last year, and it was all about like how are game companies that have started at some point being Web3, how are they sticking to it or not? So I'm curious. And then so I'm a narrative lead right now at Planet Quest, Galactic Entertainment, and that's one of these kind of Web3 things that's like game first, and a lot of the same things that you're saying. So it's interesting to see how like the language might have been totally different a year and a half ago, but not anymore. So cool.
So
Going to
go ahead. I'm glad that we kind of always had that consistent messaging. We saw an opportunity there, but we treaded cautiously because we recognized that there's a difference between intrinsic motivations and extrinsic motivations, and you have to know your audience. And we wanted to make sure that extrinsic motivations around what's happening in some kind of Web3 ecosystem doesn't jack up the motivations that are fundamental to why do you show up in a game and show up every day. And so that's always been our focus, and that hasn't changed.
Yeah, that's awesome. So you worked on a lot of cool titles when you were with EA. I'm just wondering, but two parts. So let's start with, what was the most exciting for you? Was there like one of these projects that you're like, oh man, this made my day. This determined who I am now. Like when I die, I'm going to put that on my tombstone.
Wow.
Maybe not quite that level.
Well, the thing is, I did a lot of different things in a lot of different functions, right? And so I've done a lot of cool TV spots. I've done a lot of cool trailers. But I think that the work that I'm the most proud of is what I did as a creative director on narrative in those last few years at EA. The highlight for me is definitely the short film Hunted that me and my team created for the video game Star Wars Squadrons. It was made by EA Motive in Montreal, and quite a story on how that one came together, if you'd like to hear it.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think this is what we're here for. Most of our listeners are like, what does it actually mean to do this and that? And what goes into the day-to-day? And so, any kind of stories, please.
Cool. So when the team sat down to make Star Wars Squadrons, we knew immediately that there was a challenge we were going to face, because Star Wars Squadrons is a flight simulator. That's already a niche genre. It's not exactly as simple and accessible as become a Jedi and put a lightsaber in your hands, right? And so as we were brainstorming as a team on a smaller budget niche genre, how are we going to get people excited about this? I made the pitch that we should do something that teases people and reignites their memories of geeking out over X-Wings versus TIE fighters, and make that fantasy real and just entertain them. And so I flew out to Montreal, and I met with the team there and the writers specifically on the game, and learned about their characters, learned about the storyline of the game. And there were a couple things that really stood out to me. One was that the game takes place after the events of Return of the Jedi. So Death Star 2 is exploded. Emperor's dead. Vader's dead. Empire is basically now the underdog in the timeline after that event. And so it started to make me think that there might be an interesting perspective shift that we could do here. We're always seeing Luke Skywalker or Poe Dameron just blow TIE fighters out of the sky. But what does it feel like for that guy to have a rebel ace on your back? And so that's where the kernel of this idea really started. And I started to flesh it out in collaboration with the writers at Motive until we had a pitch that we were ready to take to Lucasfilm. And at this point, I've been working with Lucasfilm for 7 years across various different EA Star Wars properties. And so it was a real pleasure this time around to not be able just to talk to the video game team over there, but also to talk to Story Group, the same group that makes sure that everything that Star Wars does across comics, novels, video games, all tie into the franchise's overall direction. And so we showed up, and I think the power of the pitch really was that inverted underdog story. And I wanted to take that idea and apply it to every aspect. So a TIE pilot is the hero, and the way that we even just frame and shoot the X-Wing is the way that you're used to seeing a TIE fighter. Close-up shots, anonymous visor, never says a word, cold and calculating. almost taking a page from Steven Spielberg's Duel, where that semi truck that's trying to kill the protagonist, the engine roar, the headlamps, the truck is really almost this monster in this movie, right? And so I wanted to do that same thing with the X-wing, and they loved the pitch. And so after that, I flew out to Lucasfilm, met with Story Group, and I was also really, really incredibly blessed to meet John Knoll at that meeting. And John Knoll is one of the original Lucasfilm guys, inventor of Photoshop, the guy who did a lot of the visual effects from the original Star Wars, came up with the idea of Rogue One, 30 years ago. And this film had a lot in common with that tone of Rogue One. And so that, I think that kind of tickled him. And so I met with him, and I thought, hey, he's just shaking hands because, we're going to do this, project with ILM. But he eventually actually went on to be our visual effects soup, and I got to learn from somebody who helped invent Star Wars, and that was just an absolute treat. There was one scary moment though, where the script goes to president of ILM. She looks at my name on the front page and goes, "Who is this yokel? This guy's not doing this." And it was just one of those things where it's so gratifying to know that if you just are committed to doing the work and not being a jerk and making good relationships, and you're prepared for those moments, then things work themselves out. Without me ever knowing about it, the folks on the video game side of Lucasfilm went to bat for me. And they said, no, actually, look at all the stuff this, guy's done. He understands the brand. He's a good steward of the brand. And, he wrote it and he should do it. And so I didn't even hear about it until it was all over. I got a call and it was like, so this happened and it's all fine. You're directing.
Nice.
And then COVID hit. and all of a sudden I was directing this entire project from home. So from my computer, mocap stage, me on a camera, only one actor on the stage at a time, people on the other side of the glass hitting record on all of the volume cameras, and doing dailies with ILM every day, reviewing shots. And it was a very fast production. I think I pitched the idea to EA in January. We got it through Story Group at Lucasfilm in March, and the piece came out in August or September of that year. So it was absolute blitz. And Lucas was kind enough to put out this piece. It was on the day it launched, it was on StarWars.com. It was a blog with me and John Knoll talking about this piece. And it just happened to be that somebody at WME was just scraping the internet and saw that, contacted me. And so then, after who knows how many years thinking, oh, I got to get an agent, I'm never going to get an agent to work in the video game industry. All of a sudden working on video game stuff, got me represented and opened up some new opportunities that have been exciting.
Yeah, that's really cool. Would you say that moment of going into over to Lucasfilm, or has there been any other moment in your life where you're kind of like awestruck? Any key moments throughout this whole career where you've been like, whoa?
I met Peter Jackson.
Nice.
That was pretty cool.
Yeah. Is that related to job stuff or just random?
So Star Wars Battlefront was one of the first games to support Dolby Atmos. And at the time, if you remember, the theater in LA, formerly known as a Kodak Theater, where the Oscars happened, had been bought by Dolby, and it was a Dolby theater. And so because we were close partners with them and showing off their technology, every so often they would give us some spare tickets to cool stuff that was happening down at their theater. And so I got to go to the premiere of Age of Ultron, and then they were having the LA premiere of the third Hobbit film as well. And so I went and I was at the party, and there's Peter Jackson, and I don't want to be weird or anything, and but I had to tell him that his transparency and how he made that trilogy and the impact that trilogy and its execution had on my life. And so got to go up, talk to him, tell him, hey, you're the reason I'm a filmmaker today. Have a fantastic evening. And he just thought that was cool. And I thought that was cool. I was like, job done.
Super cool. Yeah. I'll ask one more and see if Paul has more so I don't occupy it all, but I can hop back in, of course. So you mentioned the agent thing. And so this is something that I think a lot of, especially people going into games, are curious about, is like, do they need managers, agents to weigh in on it? I have managers on the screenplay side who could in theory do game stuff too, but they've said they would only take a percentage if they helped me get a game job, but otherwise not in that regard, which is interesting because you hear stories all over the place. So I'm curious about your thoughts on this, like when you should expect, if they're specific to games, then pretty much would you always give them a percentage of any game job you got, like forever? How does this work?
My agents have nothing to do with my video game career.
Oh, okay. So this is on the film side.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So even if they found, well, what about if they found a game thing and they're like, oh, this is awesome. We're not game people, but look at this. Would that be something that then you would consider and then probably give them a percentage of, do you think?
I suppose, but that is more of like the transactional gig economy in video game writing, which I've never been a part of. So there are certainly writers with prestige, usually because of successes in other mediums like film or television, that will get hired as contractors for a certain period of time during production. And so this is very common with big developers. You know, Call of Duty will hire quote unquote Hollywood writers to help break the story or execute on the story during that slice of production. And then, they're on to the next thing. And so if you're a writer like that, then yeah, sure. Your agent might be able to get you work writing in any medium, but video game companies are probably going to hire you like that because you've already had some success elsewhere.
Yeah.
The other way is just to get hired full-time as a job at a studio, and you may be a part of an internal writer's room that's doing that. You may be a part of a narrative design team that just happens to also do writing, but almost invariably that's just going to be a more technical job. So to get into it a little bit, writing in video games and writing in linear mediums is quite different. And the biggest difference being that ultimately the character on screen is just an avatar and they're powerless. They don't make any decisions. The player makes decisions. And so when you're thinking about like who's the star, it's really the player, not the character. And what you're trying to do, and of course this varies genre to genre, is try to create as much parity as you can between the emotional state of the player and the emotional state of the character. And so if you want the character to feel sad or scared, then you should do your utmost to make sure that the conditions of the gameplay and the context that the player is in is going to elicit those same types of feelings from the player. And so this was always like a really tricky thing. It's a tricky thing to do. I can't say I'm necessarily even an expert at it in any sense, but when I was working on Need for Speed Unbound, this was something that the creative director of the game would always kind of hammer into me. He's like, hey, you've got this beat. It makes perfect dramatic sense. I get it. It's that, bottom of the second act moment or whatever it might be, right? But is the player this fired up and angry at this other character? Because if the protagonist is like, you ruined my life, and screaming at this other person, and the player is like, I don't even remember that character from the previous cutscene because I've been doing 3 hours of racing, outside of the narrative, then all you're doing is highlighting and drawing a giant circle around the distance between where you are and where the player is. And it's actually going to kick you out of the immersion. And so it's a very different field. And it's also just much more technical. So when I'm writing here at Azra, I'm not just writing, I'm also hooking up my own dialogue logic. I'm wiring it up to NPCs and quests in the engine. And some of that, it's totally doable. It's no one should not pursue this if they're passionate about it, even if you don't think you're a quote unquote technical person. But it's certainly not open up Final Draft, right? hand it to somebody else.
Yeah, it depends on the company, of course.
Yep.
Well, while we're on that topic, actually, one more follow-up. One more, because we're on the topic.
Sure.
I did want to ask, I had written down here, with your experience at these different companies, you've done some big stuff at EA and whatnot, and I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on where's the line between, you have your narrative team and you have cinematics and you have what you were doing, and then that's all related, obviously. Do you feel like there's usually one big person who's like looking over all of the narrative still, or does the narrative team kind of have their hands in everything, or is it really siloed?
That depends on the studio culture and the team. And so I'll use Respawn Entertainment as a studio at EA as an example, and then I'll talk about Azure as well. So when I was there at Respawn, you had two very different cultures on the Apex Legends team versus the Jedi Fallen Order team. So the Apex Legends team was democratic almost to a fault. So you had a lead designer whose auspices was really design, and you had a narrative director who was in charge of that, and a producer who, made sure that things shipped on time at quality, but was not certainly like the person that owned it all. And for a long time, there wasn't really, I think, really one singular makes all the shots type of person on that team. And that has its downsides, and its advantages. Like the advantage is great ideas can come from anywhere. The downside is you've got to get a bunch of people to agree. And sometimes if, you work for one of those people, you're getting feedback from every which way in the company. And that's just the way that they chose to work for a long time. Completely different on the Jedi team. It was a single player game. It was a striven game. And Stig Asmussen is the game director. Like the buck really stopped with him. And it was his job to make sure that there was one cohesive vision of the game across design and narrative and, all the other aspects of level design, etc. So it kind of depends team to team. Here, we've been in a prototype phase and we've had a little bit more of that split between the disciplines. But we have a creative director whose job it is to make sure that there's one cohesive experience at the end of the day with those things coming together. And in every game company I've worked at, the most successful have been when design leads. It's got to be fun. Words are cheap. Words can change. Lore is not sacrosanct. You morph it and you change it, 30 times to make sure that the best ideas and the most compelling and effective gameplay is what goes out.
Awesome, cool. Paul, you got some more stuff to wrap us up?
Just a couple of, I guess you could almost call them generic questions, because as I mentioned, I really don't know much about games or how they all operate. So how would you describe a story-driven game? Like how does that like, and what would that be, I guess, in contrast to? Is that like just a one-person shooter game? I mean, just where how does the story drive the game, I guess, is the big question.
Well, a story-driven game is an experience that the player. Well, okay, I'll put it this way. What is a genre in any medium? It's basically a promise to the viewer or player that the experience that they're going to have is going to fall within a certain set of expectations. And so a story-driven game is a promise with the player that they are going to be pulled through an immersive narrator. They're going to be pulled through an immersive narrative. And the reason that they're showing up is to escape into a world, to escape into the POV of a particular character, and that they're essentially going to be the driving protagonist in something that feels like an interactive movie or TV show. So that's the promise of the genre. And that can take all sorts of forms. You can have a shooter that's a story-driven game. You could have an action RPG that's a story-driven game. You could have a completely narrative experience that has no combat whatsoever. You could have dialogue choices where, the player is role-playing, or you could have completely scripted cutscenes where the player has no choice in how the character responds. You could have a game where you are stepping into a fixed persona, like I am Spider-Man, or I am Nathan Drake, or a game like Mass Effect where you're creating the character. And so there's tons of different ways that just this one idea can present itself. And so I would really say that, saying something's a story-driven game, it's not even, if you really think about it, it's not even necessarily a genre, but it is like a paradigm within which, the gameplay is going to resolve itself based on a certain implicit promise to the player. So that would be in contrast to games where the primary promise is something else, like I am going to be freaking awesome and dominate, 16-year-olds on the internet. Or every time I show up, it's something different and it's easy for me to hop in and hop out with my friends.
Mm-hmm.
Or, I just want to step in and I want to build my perfect city or my perfect town. Or I just want to let my brain kind of nerd out on a puzzle. These are all different expectations, and story has much less weight on it. But there's some really cool podcasts out there I've heard talking about how as human beings, everything becomes a story. Everything has a dramatic arc. Tetris has a dramatic arc.
Mm-hmm.
All of us, you're trying to make order out of chaos. That's what Tetris is. And then all of a sudden, when you get that bizarre piece that's not a block or a straight line, tension, the clock is running down, tension. And so, we as humans just apply a storytelling lens onto everything, even games that have no characters whatsoever. And so I think having a grasp on the tenets of storytelling is useful no matter what type of game you're making, whether it's story driven or not.
Okay, that does help clarify it. Okay, so and also earlier you talked about you were working with, you mentioned short form and long form. Now, can you kind of go into a little more detail about, especially short form, because you said you worked on short form. I forget what the word was, but it was as opposed to like a trailer. So no, what was the difference between the two, and what was the goal of putting the short form together?
Mm-hmm. So yeah, short form generally refers to linear medium entertainment that is not a feature film. And so it can be sometimes anything that's under 45 minutes or sometimes under 22 minutes. And what I was doing at EA specifically was creating 8 to 10 minute short films. And so that's short form. And the way that differs to a trailer is that, a trailer is generally something that is, it's an advertising piece. And so it is hyping, teasing, informing, explaining, and trying to get you to take the next action to get the full taste, right? To get the full bite. It's just the amuse bouche, no matter how long it is. It's just a means to an end versus, I would say, something that is like a short form piece of entertainment. It is the entertainment. The short film feels like a complete thing in and of itself. I sat down with the promise that I'll be entertained. I was entertained, and that's what it was there to do. Now, of course, strategically, we're doing a whole lot of other things with it because it's something that fits into the thread of one particular story in a transmedia canvas. But that's ultimately, the difference between a trailer and a piece of short form content. So to put some meat on that bone, right? Like transmedia, the idea of transmedia is telling one story through multiple different mediums and channels. And so that was really the power, I think, of what we were able to eventually get to on Apex Legends. And so we would create single narratives that wove through both marketing and the game. And so you'd be in the game, all of a sudden you'd see this hatch added to the level that was never there before. That's going to some weird underground facility. What the heck is that? And then all of a sudden the short film comes out and it takes place in that facility. And when at the end of the film, when you pop up, you realize where you're at. And there's these characters, this alternate version of this character that you play that you've never seen before. And then the game has a skin for your main character that looks like that character. So now you can kind of imagine that you're role playing and you're owning the narrative, and you're stepping into something that's canon. It's not just I played another match of Apex Legends. Like, no, I'm actually reliving that fantasy, right? And then that is actually setting up the story for whatever the next character that's going to come out is, or that short film was full of teasers for what the next map is going to be in live service. And so what's the product? What's the entertainment? Is it the stuff that we did on Twitter and YouTube, or is it the game, or is it all of it, right? And so that's the type of transmedia storytelling that my department was trying to kind of ingrain in the way that we talked about that particular game. And it led to some really amazing successes.
Okay, fantastic. That is all of my questions. Justin, do you have anything else?
Oh, I'm sure we could go for another hour or two, right? But we'll have to get Neel over some beers sometime and pick his brain more in secret, and then invite him back on. So, Neel, anything that you wanted to share? Any more like shout outs, stuff coming? Anything?
Just so proud of the team here, and building a new world. After almost 7-8 years working on Star Wars, to be able to start creating kind of our own galaxy far, far away, if you will, has just been an absolute pleasure. With Mark Otero, our CEO, that's on his 9th game, has successfully sold a video game studio before, and then decided for kicks to just do it again. And so we've got just such strong leadership at the helm, and a team that's just so driven to create a new experience. So it's a pleasure to serve with them every day and tell some awesome stories.
Yeah, and the project looks great. I look forward to hearing more about it. And the invitation is always open, like we said. So when you have something big, when it releases, when you're ready to talk about it some more, if you just want to hop on and chat through one big storyline and focus purely on the game or something, we're open to it. So how can people find you? Social media or whatever? Do you have any ways that you want people to look you up?
LinkedIn is probably the place I'm most active right now. And so you can absolutely find me there. And go to azurgames.com. If you want to work in the industry, we got job openings. Go hit it.
Awesome. Cool. Awesome. Well, great. Thank you again for coming on the show. It's been wonderful.
Thanks for having me. Cheers.
And listeners, go check it out. It's going to be fun. We'll have updates when everything releases, I'm sure. And if you can leave reviews for the show, that's always welcome. Once again, I'm Justin Sloan. This is the Creative Writing Life podcast.
And I'm Paul Zeidman. You can check out my screenwriting blog, MaximumZ, at MaximumZ.blog. I'm also on Twitter at Maximum_Z. And you'll also check out my books on Amazon as well. Like you said, he's Justin, he's Neel, and I'm Paul. This has been the Creative Writing Life podcast. Thanks for listening. Stay safe, stay healthy. Most importantly, go write something.